You don't actually need to gain more energy, you just need to stop leaking it. So, most people are not actually low on life force, their energy is just lost in unconscious living. They think they need more discipline, a routine, dopamine rewiring, and supplements. But most of the time, that's not actually the problem. The true problem is just that their energy is being spent in ways they don't even notice. So, why is it that we're tired and drained and it feels almost impossible to focus on any goals? Well, the reason is because we're leaking our libido, our life force, everywhere. And by leaking, I mean the absurd amount of energy that gets burned in thought loops, inner conflict, resentment, anxiety, replaying conversations, or imagining arguments. It's like Bilbo says in Lord of the Rings, he feels like too little butter being spread out on a big piece of toast. So, most people are not actually low on energy, they're just being pulled in 1,000 different directions at once. So I think to help define, when we're talking about energy, it'd be important to focus on what Carl Jung says libido actually is. So Carl Jung defines libido entirely differently than the mainstream usage of the word. Put simply, Jung calls libido psychic energy. It's the energy behind desire, but not only sexual desire. It's also the hunger to create, to imagine, to have meaning, to embrace life itself. And in this context, if you've ever heard, libido is also what's referred to in many different traditions as life force, chi, prana, and mana. And this is the energy that drives us and makes us create, and it gives us courage. And we actually have an abundance of this energy. So the question we're asking shouldn't actually be, how do I get more energy? It should be, where is my energy actually going right now? So, where does your psychic energy actually go most of the time? Well, think about how much energy you've actually spent thinking about what someone meant by something, or replaying a conversation in your head, or obsessing over how people misunderstand you. Think about when you try to reason with an emotion, when you try to argue with it and justify to make it feel better. That's all psychic energy being burned and consumed. And this is why I especially feel short form content is horrible for your energy, because you could scroll reels like 3 weeks ago and you could see something that could cause a ripple effect that could affect you like now. It could affect you weeks later. And the reason that happens is just because it's not because you don't have too little life force, it's that you're wasting it on things you never consciously choose. So, this person, George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, he was a mystery school teacher, and I can't quite remember where he was. I think he was Greek, but he was like a really extreme guy. But he basically says that the human will is actually extremely powerful and focused. But the reason no one can exercise their true will is because it's not usually their true will taking the wheel. And that's such a good point to me because people think their problem is weakness. They think their will simply isn't strong enough. But it's really that we don't just want one thing, we want opposite things at the same time. So, for example, there's a part of you in the morning during your school day that says, I want to work out, I should be disciplined and strong, and I want to improve my body. But then the other part of you says, I'm tired, I want to sleep and rest, my brain hurts, it's what's good for me. And then that cycle just loops endlessly in a million different ways. I want to take risks, I want to stay safe, I want to be exceptional, I don't want to be embarrassed, I want to impress people, I want to do what I think is right. I want to impress my parents. And the important thing to remember is that these voices, most of the time, are truly sincere. You really do want both, just at different times. And that's why just saying, I want this, doesn't mean that action will follow, because another part of you might want the exact opposite. So, Gurdjieff has the idea of the little I's, which is similar to what Jung would refer to as complexes. Now, what complexes are is essentially fragmented, autonomous parts of yourself that have a mind of their own. And the reason we never do what we will is because there's never a consistent I or a consistent complex or will in charge long enough for there to ever be any momentum. Think about a kingdom with an empty throne, and there's many different people fighting over the throne, and they sit in it for, I don't know, like 20 minutes at a time. But no one's ever ruling long enough for the kingdom to ever gain any direction. It's just they're so focused on getting the throne immediately that there's never any will, there's never any direction. And the important thing to remember is that complexes aren't just random thoughts passing by in your head. They're actual fragments of the personality, and they have their own perspective, their own worldview, and their own history. You can't not take them seriously. Each one has its own emotional tone, its own agenda, its own desires, and its own fear. One of them wants pleasure, one of them wants mastery, one of them wants attention, one of them wants comfort, one of them wants to hide, and one of them wants to be seen. And when the thing is, when each one takes the wheel, when each one sits in the throne, it does feel like that is you. When you're angry, that angry version of yourself, you feel like this is me, right? So, and this makes up our lives almost every single day. A version of ourself makes a promise, but then another version wants to break it. And then a part of you wants the hard truth, and then another part might want the comfort and relief of an easy truth. That's, well, an easy lie. And that's why there's never enough of a consistent center to build a true will. And since there's no momentum being built up, you end up just looping and spiraling over and over. And this is why one of the most famous quotes Gurdjieff says is that man is a machine. And by machine, he means we actually hold almost zero control, which is extremely contrary to what most people think, right? Most people think we can, like, oh, I can get up and I can go to the park and I could, steal someone's dog if I wanted to, just because I can. I have freedom. But he's saying we have no freedom. He's saying we're a machine. He's saying, and by machine, he means we're purely reactionary, right? A machine has different parts, something happens, and that triggers it, and it's supposed to do the same thing over and over again. And that's what he's saying we are, like a leaf in the wind. We get offended and we insult someone. We get praised by people and we embrace it wholeheartedly and we love it. If someone rejects us, we want to retreat in bitterness and we hate the person. Something in the environment happens and our inner state changes with us, right? So, like, we're a leaf in the wind. Like, literally, we're just, you're just floating in the air and then a breeze comes by and brushes you along and then, yeah, you never actually make a decision yourself. You're not choosing anything. He's saying that we're never truly the cause. And we're just the reaction to our environment, to our friends, to our family, yeah. And we have no inner sovereignty at all. And this is why his phrasing is so extreme, because he's saying that unless consciousness is actively being cultivated, then we are slaves in the fullest sense of the word, and we have no freedom at all, right? Kind of like what the Bible says. We're in a waking sleep, and we're slaves to sin. And the cost of mechanical living is huge, especially if what he's saying is true. If we're always the reaction to our environment and of our mood and of our friends and of our family, and then of what stimulates us and what scares us, the cost of what we're losing is massive. You never build anything. You never even become a person, really, since you can't ever truly say I am. You're just different emotions getting in charge of yourself. And so what Gurdjieff says is that people don't actually have a soul unless it's developed. Unless you develop consciousness, you don't have a soul. You're just being pushed around from state to state, and you're probably indulging in as much pleasure as possible. And you might develop a belief system to cope with the suffering of the world, but then you just basically get old and die, and then you perish. And that's the price of mechanical living, according to Gurdjieff. And so his solution to this problem is actually rather simple, and it's decently easy to understand, but it's extremely difficult, and it takes a long time. So what he calls the practice to solve this is what he called self-remembering. And if I could explain it in its most simple form, self-remembering is mindfulness taken to its logical extreme. It's essentially remaining conscious in day-to-day life, like fully in day-to-day life, regular life, which is a radical shift from the traditional 3 ways to enlightenment, which is why this method's called the 4th way, which is kind of what him and Ouspensky and the people who pioneered what he was talking about called it, the 4th way, if you want to look into it. And this is far different from most meditative and spiritual practices you've heard of, simply because it's not about being calm or even thinking about and analyzing yourself. It's about active presence. It's the deliberate act of not losing yourself in the daily struggle. It is remembering yourself and remaining conscious in daily life and not being blown around by those reactions, or just to start, it's just noticing those reactions. So we're almost always asleep, and this is the process of waking up from that sleep. This process is extremely difficult and it takes years to master, and I personally have barely even scratched the surface of it. And what Gurdjieff prescribes to start doing is not to try to remain conscious the whole day. That would be a foolish and egoistic goal. He said to start by having a set time each day you do it, maybe for 30 seconds, and then you increase for a minute. Or there's a place where you go on a walk each day and you do it then. Or whenever you take a shower, you're fully conscious in the shower. And the point is not to try to do it all at once, because you won't be able to handle it. You simply will just be crushed, I've tried it before. If you try to remain conscious the entire day, something emotional or some shadow is going to build up and then it's going to burst out, and you're going to be way worse and more of a reaction than before, right? So how to actually do self-remembering, it's basically becoming fully aware of what's happening in your machine. Gurdjieff says you have to have a split. You have to have one foot in the world, half of yourself is fully in the task of what you're doing, like I'm speaking on a camera right now. I'm scrolling on this computer looking at the notes I took on this, right? Half of yourself has to be fully in the action, and then the other half of yourself has to be fully observant of yourself doing the action. So it's basically like there's a watcher in your head that's just simply observing yourself doing it. And what I like about it is that you're not leaving life, you're not stepping out of the moment, you're fully in the action, but at the same time, you're aware of yourself in the action. You're aware of your tone, aware of your posture, aware of your tension, aware of where your emotions rise, aware of your impulse, aware when something in you is getting hooked. When you're eating, you actually taste the food and you smell it and you enjoy it. Kind of like when you're a kid. When you were a kid and you were eating or outside, you were fully there almost, except you were doing it unconsciously, right? But you were fully in the moment. You fully tasted food. You fully smelled the trees and the bushes and the lake. And a lot of times I feel like we've forgot that now, right? And when you're drinking coffee, you're actually drinking it and you're absorbing it into the human organism instead of just unconsciously throwing it into your body. And I think an example of how unconscious and how much of a machine most of us are is that like half the time most of us literally will go on TikTok while we're eating. Like we'll get food and like the idea of not like watching something while we eat just like feels like bad. Like we'll delay eating for like 20 minutes trying to find something to look at. And why is that? Like seriously, think about like why is that? You have to scroll on your phone to eat food. It's ridiculous. You don't even really taste it. So over time, you start to notice with things like that, you start to notice just how much of a machine you actually are. And you can see the consistent patterns and effects that happen over weeks of the machine being the effect to the cause, which is other people in the environment. And this kind of self study of noticing your patterns and noticing when you have, bad luck or good luck, or when you're offended, when you do good, this is what like the highest levels of many different religions and traditions have done throughout history. This sort of self observation and self study, like again, treating yourself kind of like a scientist. And that's the key. The moment you can observe the machine, you're no longer completely identical with it. You've developed the observer, which is called the higher I or a developed ego. So, besides the fourth way, the three traditional paths to enlightenment, which, if you've ever studied Hinduism, I think you would have heard about these. So the first one is the way of the fakir, which is mastery through the body, through endurance and physical discipline. And this is enlightenment through the limbs, through the physical center, right? And then the second one is the way of the monk, which is mastery through faith, devotion, and the emotions, enlightenment through the heart center. And then the third one is the way of the yogi, which is mastery through the mind, knowledge, and consciousness. And this is enlightenment through the head. And if you've ever studied any like slight esoteric tradition, usually the human being is split up into thinking, feeling, and willing. So this is essentially just emphasizing, the fakir is emphasizing willing, the monk is emphasizing feeling, and then the yogi is emphasizing thinking, right? And each of these develop something real, and they definitely were true paths to enlightenment, but they tend to reject the other aspects of the human organism for certain ones. And I think our egos have developed enough throughout history to where we don't have to, change. We don't have to. We can do all three at the same time. Which is what the fourth way seeks to do. And what makes the fourth way different is that the traditional three ways, they all imply a retreat or a transformation from your daily life in pursuit of enlightenment. And what makes the fourth way special is that it actually happens within your daily life. There's no prerequisite or transformation of your schedule that needs to happen to partake in the gaining higher consciousness. It happens completely within your life exactly as it is now. The entire focus is on you entirely in your consciousness. Nothing has to do with the environment. And I think that's what makes it special. The purpose is not to escape life and transcend reality. The point is to become conscious in daily life. You don't have to go to the mountains or go to a monastery. The transformation happens in the here and now, in school, in arguments, in conflict, and in boredom. And that's what makes it so profound, because daily life is the training ground for higher consciousness. It's not something to escape. It doesn't treat true reality, daily life, the boring things like doing the laundry, it doesn't treat it as something, like lesser than. It doesn't treat it as something to transcend, like think about what do they call it in Buddhism and Hinduism? They say reality is Maya. They want to escape reality. But what this says is that reality is the training ground. It is the it is the field in which we improve. It is the way in which we reach the spiritual, which I love. And the best way I've found to not be totally consumed by emotion and leak all my energy through thought loops is to treat my emotions like the weather. And you have to sort of treat yourself like a curious scientist noticing your patterns instead of trying to justify, explain, and reason with them. And this creates a separation between you and your emotion. And again, this is talked about in many different traditions in different ways also. And I think even in modern psychology, just talking about, you know, making a separation between you and your emotion, just making the separation automatically, like, drastically improves it. Because most people think, when you feel anger, they are anger. When they feel sadness, they are sadness. There's no separation. Like, again, back to the king analogy, there's just different little eyes sitting in the throne. So, when you say, rather, there is anger in me right now, you're not repressing it or giving into it. You're simply observing it. And that kind of gives it time to pass, this is random, but also like Goethe, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, when like the way he observed the weather purely objectively, the way he observed the clouds, he didn't try to impose his own will onto the clouds or make some mythic fantasy. Even though he was a poet, he simply observed the property as it was, the property of the clouds, in a very logical, objective way. And that objectivity is what he calls delicate empiricism, which applying it to your own emotions and to yourself, I think, is the best way to do that, because it's not drowning in emotions and contemplating, and it's also not just avoiding them and suppressing them. So, but true curiosity is also extremely important, because if you're just trying to get rid of all your emotions, then it's going to come back and bite you. And this practice is actually very similar to what's outlined in the ancient Chinese alchemical text that Carl Jung was obsessed with, and it's actually what helped him discover his theory of the collective unconscious, or maybe it wasn't the collective unconscious, I think the theory of the self, but it's called the secret of the golden flower. And I might make a video on the collective unconscious too. But in the book, it shows a meditation where essentially you do the same thing. You let your thoughts pass by like the weather, and this is what Jung calls withdrawing your projections. And whenever you withdraw your projections from the outer world, a flood of energy comes into your body, and you can feel it circulating, particularly in your chest. And in the text, it says that in your chest, it becomes denser and denser, and the energy becomes more luminous. And that luminous light is what gives birth to the flower, the golden flower, which is in the center. And what makes this powerful to me is that instead of constantly throwing your energy onto situations, fantasies, fears, and external hooks, you begin recollecting it. You stop being completely possessed by what's outside you, and you begin drawing that energy back inward. And that gives birth to the golden flower, which is what Jung calls the self. It's getting in alignment with the self by withdrawing your fantasies and projections and aligning you with the guiding principle of the psyche, which is essentially the image of God within man, is what he would call it. Like the overwhelming totality, or what he calls the self. It's the overwhelming totality. It's the thing that organizes situations to happen to you, even if they're hard, even if they're difficult, even if they make you suffer, and because it knows you have to go through that. And it's what he would say is the image of God within man, so what we would call God throughout all of history. And so the goal is not just to calm down or lower your stress like what most people think of Eastern meditation. It is actually to stop scattering your energy into unconscious reaction and fantasy so that your life force can begin to gather around a deeper center. And if you look at all medieval prayer or any ancient tradition, Western or Eastern, they would laugh today at how we're constantly moving. And most people today, they don't even actually pray. They might go to their room and they might just ask for forgiveness for a couple minutes, or they might just wallow around in their guilt, or they might ask for something and say, thank you for my blessings. But none of them are actually doing true prayer, which is alignment with divine will, which requires actual stillness. It requires stillness. It's not just your ego asking for things, which is what most people think it is. They don't actually. There's no way most people feel a true connection to the divine whenever they're just sitting there and they're just asking for forgiveness, or they're just asking for things to happen. If all like medieval monks or medieval scholars, they would all laugh at whatever that is. And that's what the biggest misconception around westernized Christian tradition is, that people don't know about that because we're so used to modern Westernism. But people still know that in Eastern meditation, you get still, obviously. So the reason is that when you get still, your body screams at you, and it feels like you need to move because the will is usually trapped in the limbs. But when you truly meditate or you truly pray, the will, instead of being trapped in the limbs and the body and wanting to do things and move and it wants to scream, instead of that, the will flows upwards. It flows upwards into spiritual growth and attunement with divine will. It's almost kind of like a burning. I don't know why. It reminds me of like a star, a shooting star, or a firework. It like digests upwards. It's interesting. And so the practical way to start all of this is that in daily life, to stop leaking all your energy, is just to start by noticing when you do it. Notice your thought loops, especially when you just keep replaying the same thing in your mind or when you find yourself arguing with your emotions, trying to reason and justify with them. And that's one of the biggest leaks. It's not just when you don't be mad at yourself just for feeling something, feeling anger in the moment. Um, like it's getting trapped in the repetitive mental machinery around it. Like something I heard the other day. I can't remember where it's from, but um, you can't control the first thought, but you can control the second thought. You can control this and the thought after that and the thought after that. So, you know, just just stop trying to reason and argue with your emotions because they're not logical. Just only your ego is logical. Emotions are convictions and experiences. They're autonomous. You're not going to change their mind. So, and then like notice when you get your phone out and you start scrolling against your will from boredom. Try to go for a walk fully consciously in your neighborhood. Feel your breath, feel every limb in your body, and notice what you're looking at vividly. Like when you pass by a tree and it's a beautiful tree, like actually look at the tree. Most people they'll pass by a tree or a red cardinal will pass by and they won't even acknowledge it and observe it. And I feel like that's just a symptom of modern unconsciousness. Like think about when you were a child. Think about the intense curiosity you had about every single thing in the world. You had such a zest for life and a zest for living and everything that was outside. And I think and the goal in the modern age is to consciously go back to that. And then, yeah, so just begin there. Catch the moment when something outside in the world hooks you and starts draining your energy, and then simply observe it out of curiosity like a scientist. Instead of just like, getting mad at yourself, like, oh, I'm doing it again, just be like, ah, interesting. And then over time, you just start to track your habits and you start to notice. And I don't mean track your habits like write them down. That's kind of gay. Don't like write them down, but just, when you start to actually notice them using your consciousness, then over time, they automatically kind of start to correct and you can start injecting your will. But most importantly is to just observe. Observe. That's the key. Observe. And don't try to be conscious all day or try to fix all your problems at once because it won't work. Just begin by noticing where your life force is being spent unconsciously. Notice when you do things automatically, when you wake up and like think about why do we not do what we want to do? We never do what we want to do, right? This is the only way to stop that is to start observing. Because again, all of this to say, you don't need to gain more energy, you just need to stop leaking it. So